You're watching Southern Crimes.
July 1997, Lake Sam Rayburn, Texas. You're a 51-year-old executive enjoying a quiet weekend at your lake house, the kind of peaceful retreat that makes the stress of running a business feel like a distant memory. The East Texas heat hangs heavy over the Sam Rayburn Reservoir, and you've just finished making dinner after a relaxing day hanging out around the property. As you savor the quiet evening, the clothes tumble rhythmically in the dryer. Everything feels normal, routine, exactly as it should be. Then you hear something, a car pulling up the driveway. A voice calls out your name, someone you recognize perhaps, or at least someone who doesn't seem threatening enough to make you hesitate. You wrap up the other half of your dinner, place it in the refrigerator, and walk toward the front door. You step outside into the humid Texas night, leaving behind the safety of your lake house and the half-finished meal that will become the last evidence of your normal life. Because at Lake Sam Rayburn, where the piney woods stretch endlessly toward the horizon and the dark water holds secrets for decades, some conversations end with more than just words, and some people who walk out their front door never come back. This is Southern Crimes. McAllen, Texas, April 16th, 1960. The air was thick with the scent of orange blossoms and the anticipation of Easter Sunday. Irene Garza, a 25-year-old school teacher and former beauty queen, told her parents she was heading to Sacred Heart Church for one last confession before the holiday. Irene was in fact locally very well known. She was the first Latina drum majorette at McAllen High School and a woman dedicated to the indigent students she taught at Thigpen Elementary. She was a woman of deep, unwavering faith. She pulled up to the church in her family's car, stepped out into the humid evening, and walked toward the rectory. She was never seen alive again. 2 days later, the search began to yield grim results. Her high-heeled shoe, a lace veil, and her purse were found discarded along a road leading out of town. On April 21st, searchers at an irrigation canal near Business 83 spotted something floating face down. It was Irene. She'd been beaten, assaulted while unconscious, and ultimately suffocated. The community was paralyzed with grief, but for the investigators, the most chilling detail wasn't what they found in the water. It was who was missing from the church. The investigation immediately centered on a 27-year-old priest named John Bernard Fite. He was the man who'd heard Irene's final confession that night. During questioning, Fite made a series of admissions that should have ended his career and started a prison sentence. He admitted to hearing Irene's confession, but uncharacteristically, he did so in the privacy of the rectory rather than the standard public confessional. When police drained the irrigation canal where Irene was found, they pulled up a heavy Eastman Kodaslide viewer, a device used for viewing photographic slides. It belonged to Father Fite. Fellow priests also noted fresh, deep scratches on the backs of Fite's hands. His excuse was clumsy. He claimed he'd been locked out of his room and scratched himself climbing through a second-story window. But the evidence went beyond Irene Garza. Just 3 weeks prior, another woman, Maria America Guerra, had been attacked inside a nearby church. She positively identified Fite as her assailant, In 1962, Fite pleaded no contest to aggravated assault in the Guerra case and paid a meager $500 fine. But as for the murder of Irene Garza, well, the gears of justice somehow ground to a halt. For the next 50 years, the case became a masterclass in institutional protection. The Catholic Church moved Fite from monastery to monastery, eventually sending him to a treatment center for quote-unquote troubled priests in New Mexico. Internal church memos, later described as smoking guns, suggested a coordinated effort between high-ranking clergy and local authorities to protect the church's reputation by keeping Fite out of a courtroom. By the 1970s, Fite had left the priesthood, moved to Arizona, and settled into a quiet life as a married man and food charity volunteer. The silence finally broke in 2002. A former monk named Dale Tackney came forward with a staggering claim. Decades earlier, while they were at monastery together, Fite had confessed the murder to him in detail. Tackney described how Fite told him he'd bound and killed a young woman in Texas. This was bolstered by Father Joseph O'Brien, a priest who'd been at Sacred Heart in 1960, who also confirmed that Fite had made similar admissions of guilt. Despite this, the local district attorney at the time refused to indict, calling the aging witnesses unreliable. It took a political earthquake in 2014, an election where the Irene Garza case was the central campaign issue, to finally move the needle. A new DA, Ricardo Rodriguez, reopened the file and authorized an arrest. In February 2016, 83-year-old John Fite was arrested at his home in Scottsdale, Arizona. He was extradited to Texas to face a jury for a crime committed 57 years prior. The trial was a collision of history and forensics. While the defense argued that no DNA or blood evidence remained to link Fite to the crime, the prosecution relied on the weight of the confessions he'd made to his fellow men of the cloth. On December 7, 2017, the jury delivered their verdict: guilty. At the age of 85, Fite was sentenced to life in prison, finally trading his quiet Arizona retirement for a cell in Huntsville. He died in custody in 2020. Irene Garza's family waited nearly 6 decades for a resolution that seemed impossible. Her case is a dark reminder that in the South, some secrets are held by the very institutions meant to provide sanctuary, but even a half-century of silence can eventually be broken. Pasadena, Texas, March 27th, 1979. It was 5 p.m. on a clear, sunny Tuesday afternoon in Houston. 17-year-old Angela Desiree Kelly was hanging out at a Montrose area apartment with her best friend, Sandra Beasley. Angela was a student in the A-Leaf School District with plans for the following week. She wanted to buy a bus ticket to visit her boyfriend in Arkansas. But to get the cash, Angela decided to make a quick run. She told Sandra she'd be right back, planning to hit a convenience store for a drink and stop by a pawn shop less than a mile away to sell some jewelry. She stepped out into the daylight and vanished. She never made it to the store, and she never showed up at the pawn shop. Less than 10 hours later, at 2:30 a.m., a motorist driving home from work in Pasadena spotted something on the curb of Red Bluff Road. It was Angela. Her body had been dumped in the southbound lanes nearly 20 miles away from the apartment where she'd just been seen hours before. The scene was a visceral display of violence. Angela's hands were bound behind her back with thick gray electrical wire. A rope was still cinched tightly around her neck. Her gauzy white shirt had been pushed up to her waist, and her blue jeans were heavily stained with dirt, suggesting a struggle or a forced movement across the Texas soil. The Harris County Medical Examiner confirmed the obvious: Angela had been strangled to death. For over 45 years now, the Pasadena Police Department has chased the ghost of her killer. They followed dozens of leads and retested forensic evidence as technology moved from basic blood typing to advanced DNA profiling. Investigators have looked closely at her inner circle, conducting extensive interviews with friends and associates, but the case, officially logged as case number 79006455, has remained unsolved. Recently, the investigation has seen a surge of renewed interest. Documentary crews and cold case researchers have been digging through the files, tracking down persons of interest who haven't been spoken to in decades. Angela's best friend, Sandra, still carries the weight of that sunny afternoon, haunted by the fact that such a violent abduction could happen in broad daylight. She remains convinced that the answer is close, that the investigation is one hair away from a breakthrough. Today, Red Bluff Road is a busy thoroughfare, but for the Pasadena Detective Division, it remains the site of a 1979 mystery that refuses to fade. Angela Kelly was a girl with a bus ticket to buy and a life ahead of her. Instead, she became a permanent entry in the ledger of Texas's unsolved homicides. Shepherd, Texas, May 3rd, 1992. It was Mother's Day weekend, and 19-year-old Natasha Atchley was supposed to be heading home to Livingston to celebrate with her family. A former cheerleader and college student, Natasha had spent the previous night at a party on a rural dirt road in San Jacinto County. She was last seen around 3 a.m., leaning against her 1990 Chevrolet Camaro. Some friends described her as a, quote, free spirit who lived life on the edge. The following day, when she never arrived at her mother's house, well, panic set in. It was a local fisherman who finally found the answer on a remote logging road about a mile from the party site. He spotted a smoldering hatchback, its paint blistered and tires melted. A responding deputy, assuming it was just another abandoned stolen vehicle, had the car towed to a local yard. But it wasn't until Natasha's mom tracked the car to the impound lot that the true horror was revealed. Tucked in the rear hatchback area were skeletal remains so thoroughly cremated that investigators later remarked the victim's entire body could fit into a shoebox. For nearly 30 years, the case was treated as a brutal, calculated homicide. Retired Chief Deputy Tom Branch and the Texas Rangers noted several factors that pointed toward foul play. Lab reports identified the use of quote-unquote drip gas, an unrefined byproduct of oil and gas drilling, as the accelerant. Obtaining drip gas required specific knowledge and access to oil wells. This narrowed the suspect pool significantly. The investigation was further complicated by the environment of the party Natasha attended. Rumors swirled about drugs, alcohol, and partygoers with powerful connections to local officials. 2 individuals were eventually arrested for aggravated assault after a witness claimed to see them beating Natasha, but the case collapsed when the witness recanted. For decades, the consensus was clear. Someone at the party had killed Natasha, moved her car to a secluded spot, and used an industrial accelerant to erase the evidence. However, in 2023, the case took a polarizing turn. A fresh look by the Cold Justice investigative team introduced a theory that reframed the entire tragedy. They argued that investigators might have gotten it wrong. Looking at the rain-soaked conditions of that night, they proposed that Natasha's Camaro had simply become stuck in the deep East Texas mud. If she was intoxicated and panicked, she might have repeatedly revved the engine, causing it to overheat and ignite a fire she couldn't escape. They pointed to the lack of footprints or secondary tire tracks at the scene as evidence that she was alone, but this theory remains a bitter pill for the family to swallow. Her brother Chad Woodard argues that Natasha was a capable driver who knew these roads well. More importantly, the quote-unquote accident theory fails to explain the presence of the drip gas found by the early forensic teams. Why would an unrefined oil byproduct be involved in spontaneous vehicle fire? Today, the death of Natasha Atchley remains one of the most debated mysteries in East Texas. The Texas Rangers haven't closed the file, and an $18,000 reward still stands for any information that leads to a definitive conclusion. Whether it was a horrible, tragic accident or a covered-up execution, the scorched dirt road in Shepherd remains a silent witness to Natasha's final night. For her family, the shoebox of remains is not a resolution. It's a lingering demand for truth. Lake Sam Rayburn, Texas, July 1997. Bill Roland was a 51-year-old executive from Lufkin who spent his weekends at a secondary house overlooking the Sam Rayburn Reservoir. He was a man of habit, prominent businessman who'd traveled to the lake in late July to care for a stray dog and get in some fishing. But when his wife couldn't reach him the next morning, well, she drove to the lake house and found a scene that looked like a snapshot frozen in time. Inside the house, clothes were still tumbling in the dryer. On the counter, a hamburger Bill had prepared sat half-eaten. The other half had been neatly wrapped and placed in the refrigerator. It looked as if he'd been interrupted mid-meal by someone he knew, or someone he at least felt safe enough to step outside and speak to. Bill, his silver Chevy Z71 pickup, and his 24-foot pontoon boat were all gone. Over the next 3 months, the Texas Rangers began a grim scavenger hunt across the piney woods of East Texas, recovering Bill's property in a trail of deliberate destruction. First, they found his truck on a wooded logging road in Angelina County. The truck had been torched, the license plates ripped off to delay identification. Weeks later, his boat trailer was found abandoned 20 miles away in the National Forest. But it was the discovery of the pontoon boat in October that shifted the investigation from a missing person to a homicide. The boat was found hidden under a canopy of willow trees in a remote cove. The pontoons had been peppered with 12-gauge shotgun blasts, a clear, albeit failed attempt to sink the vessel. Retired Texas Ranger Don Morris noted that whoever shot the boat didn't realize that modern pontoons are filled with foam. They'll take on water, but they won't go down. To the Rangers, this didn't look like a random act of theft. It looked like someone familiar with the lakes was trying to hide the evidence of a murder. Despite massive search efforts involving divers, helicopters, cadaver dogs scouring the shoreline of Sam Rayburn, Bill Roland's body has never been found. The perpetrator went to incredible lengths to scatter the evidence, moving the truck, the trailer, and the boat to 3 different locations across 2 counties. By destroying the assets, they effectively destroyed the primary crime scene, leaving investigators with no blood, no DNA, and no shell casings to tie to a suspect. Today, the case remains one of the most frustrating files in the San Augustine County Sheriff's Office. The Texas Rangers believe the answer lies with someone who was on the lake that weekend, someone who knew Bill's routine and knew how to navigate the backwater coves of the reservoir. Texas Crime Stoppers still offers a reward for information, hoping that someone will finally explain what happened in the minutes after Bill Roland put down that hamburger and walked at his front door. Midlothian, Texas, April 18, 2016. Outside the Creekside Church of Christ, a heavy thunderstorm was drenching the North Texas pavement. Inside, the motion-activated security cameras flickered to life. The footage they captured is among the most chilling in the history of modern American crime. It was 3:50 a.m. A figure was wandering the church hallways dressed in full SWAT-style tactical gear. The suspect wore a black helmet, heavy gloves, and a tactical vest with the word police printed in bold white letters across the chest and back. For 30 minutes, this individual moved through the building carrying a hammer and a pry bar, occasionally smashing a glass door or prying at a lock. They weren't looking for money, they were waiting. At 4:18 a.m., 45-year-old fitness instructor Missy Beavers arrived to set up for her 5 a.m. Camp Gladiator class. Because of the storm, she'd moved the session indoors. Shortly after 5 a.m., her students arrived and found Missy on the floor of the church. She'd been beaten and punctured to death with a blunt instrument. The Midlothian police and the FBI were handed a massive head start. High-definition footage of the killer in the hour before the murder. But the gear that made the suspects so visible also made them basically a ghost. The helmet and vest obscured every identifying feature, leaving investigators to focus on the one thing the gear couldn't hide: the suspect's walk. The individual exhibited a very distinct, almost labored gait. Their feet turned outward, and they appeared to have significant difficulty moving their right leg. While the walk was initially thought to be male, investigators eventually considered the possibility of a female suspect due to certain quote-unquote feminine movements. However, a forensic podiatrist later concluded that the sheer weight of the tactical gear, likely 30 pounds or more, could have distorted the natural stride of anyone wearing it. The crime scene itself suggested a cold-blooded premeditation. Although the suspect was seen vandalizing the church, nothing was stolen. Missy's purse and iPad were left untouched. To the FBI, the broken glass wasn't a burglary, it was a stage set, a distraction meant to make a targeted execution look like a random crime of opportunity. The investigation dug deep into Missy's digital life. Warrants revealed she'd received creepy messages on LinkedIn in the days leading up to her death. Surveillance from a nearby business also caught a suspicious vehicle, a 2010 to 2012 Nissan Altima or Infiniti G37, circling a parking lot at 2 a.m. that morning, flashing its lights before vanishing back into the rain. Every member of Missy's family was vetted and cleared. Her husband was on a fishing trip in Mississippi. Her father-in-law was in California. Even a suspicious bloodied shirt brought to a dry cleaner by a relative was found to be animal blood from a dogfight, just as the family had claimed. 10 years later, the Midlothian Police Department is still searching for the person in the police vest. They believe the killer is someone who knew Missy's schedule, someone who perhaps messaged her from the shadows of a fake profile, and someone who walked away from that church with a secret that not even a $150,000 reward has yet to break. The footage of the tactical suspect remains a haunting digital loop, a silent predator waiting in a Texas church for a woman who was just trying to start her day. Laredo, Texas, September 2018. In the border town of Laredo, San Bernardo Avenue is a stretch of road known for a cycle of poverty and the sex work that often follows it. In the late summer of 2018, that cycle turned into a hunting ground. Over the course of just 12 days, 4 people were found executed on the remote rural roads of Webb County. The victims were all marginalized, struggling with addiction, and often overlooked by society. But their killer, on the other hand, was someone the city was supposed to trust. Juan David Ortiz was a 10-year veteran of the U.S. Border Patrol. To his neighbors, he was a Navy veteran, a family man, and a churchgoer. To the law enforcement community, he was a supervisory intelligence agent at the Laredo Joint Intelligence Center. He was so well embedded in the system that while the Texas Rangers and local detectives were scrambling to find the serial killer, they were actually asking Ortiz for help. In fact, he used his high-level access to run license plate checks for investigators, monitoring their progress in real time to ensure they weren't getting too close to him. The spree began on September 3rd with the murder of a woman named Melissa Ramirez. 10 days later, Claudine Luera was killed after she confronted Ortiz about Melissa's disappearance. On September 15th, two more victims, Giselda Hernandez and Janelle Ortiz, were killed just hours apart. Ortiz used his agency-issued .40 caliber handgun, picking up his targets in his white Dodge Ram and driving them into the darkness of the brush country. The investigation only broke because of the bravery of a fifth potential victim, Erica Pena. While sitting in Ortiz's truck at a gas station, she noticed him becoming weird and erratic. When he pulled his pistol on her, she didn't hesitate. She leapt from the moving vehicle, leaving her shirt in his grasp, and sprinted toward a nearby state trooper. Her escape triggered a citywide manhunt for the white pickup, but in the 5 hours it took to find him, Ortiz managed to kill his final two victims. He was eventually found hiding in the bed of a truck in a hotel parking garage after posting goodbye messages to his family on Facebook. In a chilling 9-hour videotaped confession, the quote-unquote all-American agent dropped his mask. He didn't blame his actions on a lapse in judgment. He characterized them as a service. He called his victims scum and claimed he was cleaning up the streets because the local police had failed to do so. While his defense later pointed to a cocktail of PTSD meds and alcohol as a cause for a mental break, investigators noted the cold, calculating nature of his crimes, especially his ability to continue his intelligence work while the bodies were still warm. In December 2022, Juan David Ortiz was convicted of capital murder. At the request of the victims' families, the prosecution didn't seek the death penalty, opting instead for a sentence that would ensure he never saw the sunrise over the Texas border as a free man again. He was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The Laredo serial murders exposed a terrifying vulnerability in the systems of power meant to protect the public. It proved that a badge and a background check are no guarantee against the darkness. Today, the victims' families continue to seek closure in a city where the line between the law and the lawless was for 12 days non-existent. Texas is a land of wide-open spaces and deep-seated traditions, but as we've seen, those spaces can hide secrets for a long time. From the silence of a church confessional to the calculated betrayal of a federal agent, these stories remind us that justice in the South is often a slow, arduous journey. The dust may settle, but the search for the truth never stops.